Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we are now in the last part of the whole week's procedures. Last two items addressing in this afternoon, and the first item I will chair, and the item is the increased migration pressure on the borders of Latvia and Lithuania and Poland with Belarus. I would like to say only for you it's an important item, and I even personally know it's important because myself I visited on the border of Lithuania and Belarus 2 weeks ago. So I know its significance, and I'm very pleased that we do have the discussion here today. We have made a report. It's an urgent debate, as you know, and we have prepared a report. Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons have prepared it, and I'm honored to ask Mrs. Anne-Mari Virolainen on behalf of the committee. She made the report. Unfortunately, she is online, but hopefully she is on the line, and she is. So Anne-Mari, the floor is yours. You have actually the normal 7 minutes, and at the end 3 minutes to react after the debate. We try roughly to finish the meeting, this part, not the meeting, but this part of the discussion by 5:30. It's around because we started close to 10 minutes late. Okay, Anne-Mari, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President, dear colleagues. So this report condemns the hybrid attack by Belarus to Europe and introduces measures to hold Belarus responsible for its action. Using vulnerable people as instruments is something that cannot be accepted. EU Home Affairs Commissioner Ms. Ylva Johansson's statement from August 26 that the situation on the Belarus border is not a migration issue, but a part of the aggression of Lukashenko towards Poland, Lithuania and Latvia, with the aim to destabilize the EU. That is correct in its reasoning why migration pressure has increased on the borders of Latvia, Lithuania and Poland. The situation at the eastern border with Belarus has remained dire for months. In May and August 2021, Lithuania and Latvia faced a sudden influx of migrants from Belarus. These people are mostly refugees and asylum seekers. The number of irregular arrivals to Lithuania increased from 80 in 20 to more than 4,100 in 21 so far. Majority of the persons who crossed the border were Iraqi nationals. There are also persons from Afghanistan, Cuba, the Russian Federation, Sri Lanka and India. As reported by Latvian and Lithuanian officials, Belarusian security forces were directly involved in sending third country nationals across these EU's external borders. Belarusian authorities have denied this. In August and September 21, several dozen persons from Iraq and Afghanistan were stranded around Belarusian borders. According to the receiving country's authorities and several statements by European Union officials, border control measures were introduced because of migratory pressure organized by the Belarusian authorities. So Belarusian authorities are allegedly involved in the transfer of nationals of third countries and bringing them to its borders. And this has created a human rights emergency situation. These recent arrivals of migrants and asylum seekers have created significant challenges by putting a strain on the receiving countries' migrant and refugee reception capacities. These countries have not experienced a similar rapid inflow of migrants and asylum seekers before. They did not have appropriate accommodation facilities ready, neither trained staff to welcome them. This, however, cannot justify the inadequate response to the needs of asylum seekers. As recorded by human rights organizations, many migrants and asylum seekers have been blocked for several weeks on the border in very difficult and inhumane conditions. There has not been access to drinking water, food, medical assistance, sanitation facilities, nor shelter. Effective border management by Council of Europe member states should be accompanied by adequate responses to the rights of the asylum seekers. Border management should be fully compliant with European and international law standards, and in particular the European Convention on Human Rights and the Convention relating to the status of refugees. The present situation requires rapid action. What we also need after the acute situation is new structures and instruments in order to strengthen Europe's resilience and preparedness for similar situation when migration is used as aggression for political purposes. For this, the European Union needs to reconsider its reception procedures and solidarity mechanism. It is vital to develop contingency preparedness with flexible and adjustable reception mechanism, human-centered responses, and adequate funding. The UNHCR, IOM, and OECD will have an important role to play in this process. The statement from August 18th by the EU's Home Affairs Ministers, the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs, and EU Home Affairs Commissioner Johansson, the representatives of Frontex, EASO, and Europol, provides a promising initiative for improving Europe's preparedness to face hybrid attacks. Providing funding to increase reception capacities, facilitating the integrated border management, and developing adequate legal frameworks to ensure effective protection of EU external borders. In reaction to the situation, I provide in the report a chronological description of the situation in each country concerned, the reaction to these events by the European Union, the response of the Belarusian authorities, and our main concerns as regards to the respect of human rights of the migrants. The situation at the Belarus border raises a number of serious human rights concerns. As reported by authorities of the countries concerned, the majority of migrants and asylum seekers appear to have arrived in Belarus by organized flights from Baghdad to Minsk. Some of them paid important amounts of money being promised to be brought directly to an EU country. As indicated by UNHCR, it is in its general statement on July 27th this year. When states encourage population outflows to neighboring countries, they create grave risks and compound the trauma and suffering of people fleeing. It drives risky onward movements, exposes people to potential exploitation, and can overwhelm reception capacities in other countries. In the report, we call governments of member states of the Council of Europe to support Latvia, Lithuania and Poland by providing urgent financial and technical assistance to ensure necessary protection of migrants, asylum seekers and refugees. We address the receiving countries to provide access to asylum procedures to all those seeking asylum, refrain from pushbacks to Belarus, provide necessary safeguards to ensure the human rights of those seeking entry to their territory, provide adequate reception, accommodation, and identification of people with special needs, and access to information about the asylum procedure and social and other services for newly arrived. Access to territory and asylum procedures should be granted without exceptions to those who wish to apply for asylum. Individual assessments of the situation of each asylum seeker should be undertaken prior to any removal from European territory. Adequate reception condition, medical assistance, and unhindered access for organizations providing humanitarian assistance and legal aid are also need to be ensured. The Assembly calls on the authorities of Belarus to stop the instrumentalization of people in general, and especially migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers, those who are most vulnerable. The Assembly calls the authorities of Belarus to cooperate with its neighbors and with the European Union to solve the ongoing problems across these borders. Dear colleagues, I call you to support the draft resolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie, for your introduction for the issue. You are a bit over time, so let's try to do so that the final statement would be around 2 minutes, so we are operating according to the rules. Fine. Now we move to the speakers list, and we, as usually, first have the political groups. First group is on the list is Socialists and Greens. Domako Hadjukovic, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, first of all, allow me to thank our rapporteur for her excellent work. I'm sure that she has done her utmost to present us with a thorough and comprehensive report. The reports we have been receiving from the borders of Latvia, Lithuania and Poland with Belarus of a huge increase of influx of irregular migrants are worrying on a number of issues. Just to illustrate the point, the number of irregular arrivals to Lithuania alone increased by 110 times compared to 2019. The first issue that needs our attention is a humanitarian one, as ever-growing number of migrants are trying to enter Latvia, Lithuania and Poland, many of whom ask for asylum, in other words, international protection. This august body needs to remain vigilant in order to prevent mistreatment of asylum seekers, as well as denial of access to asylum claim to those who ask for it. It is our duty to urge countries in question to refrain from pushbacks and give protection to asylum seekers. We have a moral and humane obligation to help those that need help. Furthermore, it is vital to uphold the law and obligations undertaken by member states. Border management should be fully compliant with European and international law, and in particular, the European Convention of Human Rights and the 1959 Convention relating to the status of refugees. Furthermore, all relevant agencies like UNHCR, IOM and alike should assist our member countries facing these challenges. I say to our colleagues from Latvia, Lithuania and Poland, you are not alone. This is a responsibility of all of us, both in the Council of Europe and in the European Union. The second issue is a clear instrumentalization of migratory flows by Belarus in order to destabilize recipient countries and create humanitarian crisis. President Lukashenko is clearly and openly saying that his objective is to, and I quote, fill Lithuania and neighboring countries with migrants and drugs, end of quote. This is clearly an unacceptable action and deserves our strongest condemnation. Recognizing the true generator of this crisis is the first step in solving it. It is completely unacceptable to use human beings as a tool of pressure. It is unacceptable to make them hostages of the last European dictators' schemes. Therefore, I urge you, dear colleagues, to support this report, and that in doing so, we raise our voices for humane treatment of migrants and those who wish access to asylum procedure. Also, we should send a strong message to our friends in Poland, Lithuania and Latvia that they are not alone, but also they have certain obligations and should uphold the law. And finally, we need to strongly condemn a regime that uses hopes and desperation of migrants to promote instability and chaos. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And the next speaker on the list on behalf of the political groups is EPP Group, Dimitrios Kairidis, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are very happy with the report at the European People's Party and happy with the chance to discuss this very serious situation created by an authoritarian regime that, by instrumentalizing a humanitarian concern, it weaponizes immigrants and asylum seekers. to put pressure on neighboring countries and all of Europe. I have 5 points. First, a state behaving like a criminal gang and a clandestine human trafficker on a massive scale, that is Belarus. Second, a hybrid attack that concerns the whole of Europe, not just the transit frontline countries like Poland, Lithuania and Latvia, because A, the incoming flows have Germany and other rich EU countries as their final destination, and B, because by exacerbating the political tensions and raising the heat over the sensitive issue of migration, it attempts to divide Europe and Europeans, both within our nations and among our countries. 3, we don't forget the humanitarian dimension of the crisis, and that we are often dealing with destitute and vulnerable people. We must take all measures to avoid unnecessary human suffering, especially before the weather conditions worsen with the advance of winter. The deaths that have already occurred are particularly regrettable and an insult to our humanity, to our values, and to the mission of our Council here. But let me be clear. We are humanitarian, but we are not naive. And the Belarusian dictator should understand that we are all united in our contempt for his repressive regime and despicable methods. 5, we call on national authorities in Poland and all neighboring EU countries to make good use of the services of Frontex, that has the experience and resources to safeguard our common EU borders. And finally, I cannot conclude before I cannot resist the temptation to note that Mr. Lukashenko was not particularly original. He has followed on the footsteps of Mr. Erdogan, who used the same unacceptable methods in February 2020 to put pressure on Greece and extract concessions from Europe by busing thousands of people on the land border between Greece and Turkey. Mr. Erdogan failed, and so will Mr. Lukashenko. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the next one is ALDE Group, Maria Jufereva-Skuratovsky. She's online, I understood. Yes, here you are. Please.
Honorable President, dear colleagues, I would like to thank the rapporteur for such important work. The situation on the Latvian, Lithuanian and Polish border with Belarus is not only a regional security concern for us. Currently, several dozen persons from Iraq and Afghanistan are stranded on the EU-Belarusian border. President Alexander Lukashenko uses migrant trafficking as a hybrid attack to undermine the values and the unity of the EU countries. He manipulates defenseless people who came with a hope for a better life. He uses them as a political instrument. This is completely unacceptable. Therefore, we need to have a common strategy to deter President Lukashenko from escalating the crisis and to prevent instrumentalization of migrants. I would like to underline that addressing migration-related challenges should be fully compliant with international law and human rights obligations. We must ensure that asylum procedures are fair, credible and transparent. Cross-border pushbacks of migrants have put these people in danger. Many migrants on the EU-Belarus border have endured extremely harsh living conditions. For instance, they have limited access to medical help, to sanitation facilities, to water and food supplies. We should also take into account the climate conditions. The winter is generally harsh in this region. We cannot leave people in humanitarian or human rights emergency. Migrants stranded on the border with Belarus do have a right to assistance and protection. We should work collaboratively to resolve this situation, respecting people's freedom and prioritizing human rights. Dear colleagues, the situation on the EU-Belarus border is our common problem. Hence, we must immediately recognize the serious challenges posed by increased migration pressure. We must unitedly deliver two simple messages to the government of Belarus. First, the aims of Lukashenko's hybrid attacks will never be achieved. Secondly, the Belarusian regime has already experienced extensive damage in the form of restrictive measures and termination of joint projects. And without any doubt, it will face even more damage because of these hybrid attacks. If this confrontation escalates, introducing personalized sanctions and sanctions against specific economic sectors could become necessary measures on the EU parts. It's also possible that we will be forced to choose between fighting for human rights and freedoms and facing financial difficulties that could result from sanctions also for Europe. This choice will become our trial and exam in humanity. Thank you very much for attention, and I recall to support this report.
Thank you very much, Maria. Now we move to AC Group, and I'm asking Boban Prarerin. Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The subject is increased migration pressure on the borders of three countries, Latvia, Lithuania and Poland. And last Tuesday, I participated in the Commission, and my impression was, do we now lead or don't we lead? The discussion concentrated on increase of migrants pressure and not a real focus of the situation of those three countries. So there came comments like, we like immigrants, migration must take place. I accept that, but we should deal with the situation of those three countries. And what happened is, and I got the experience, let's, as a group, as a commission, make an apple pie, and with a lot of discussions, then we finish with a pie without apples. That feeling I got in the meeting, and that's a pity for those three countries. For we are talking about a serious situation at those borders. We heard of destabilization of Belarus, and it is a situation far from regular stream of migrants. These three countries try to bring in that they want to have changes in the text to support their situation. It's easy to talk about that from out the Netherlands or from out UK or France or whatever, but they are just on the border side. But unfortunately, it was not possible. The rapporteur, she decided mostly no on their amendments, and the votes were accordingly. That happens, of course, it is a democratic process, but anyway, it was not a situation that there was a real support to the three countries. So a theoretical solution came up and not a practical solution. The relief for those three countries was not realized, but also the care for the humanity of the misused migrants, so-called migrants, is not really cared for. The Council of Europe leaves so in this way member states in a difficult situation with no solution. Three disappointed members with a clear problem. The urgency over there is great. We heard it from others here before me and from the rapporteur. But this is not a real help. It is really a case, as our chairman, or president, I must say, at the beginning of our meetings this week said, to lead or not to lead. It's a missed chance. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And now the last group is on the list is UL, United Left, and Hisiar Odzoy, please.
Thank you, Chair. Let me start by saying that it is utterly shameful that poor refugees are being instrumentalized by political leaders and used as tools for political ends. Now we have the situation at the borders of Belarus and other countries detailed in the report. In 2016 and in 2020, it was the president of my own country threatening to open the gates of hell and pouring refugees into European territories. And I promise to you Tomorrow, there will be many other leaders in countries that are located on main migration routes into Europe, acting similarly, blackmailing, threatening European countries, and using refugees as political tools or weapons, unless Europe does produce a sustainable, comprehensive, and humanitarian policy in this regard. Refugees are often taken as a humanitarian issue or a disturbing population that is quantified and technically managed. The refugees are not an issue, a problem, a crisis, a calamity, or a disaster. They are not constantly raising numbers either. Tens of millions of people are on the move as potential asylum seekers in Europe as a result of policies dislocating and often violently displacing peoples from their homelands. These people are coming to European countries not to destabilize or to disturb your comfortable lives here, but because their countries are destroyed, their homes demolished, their family members killed or tortured, their livelihoods shattered, and they just want to have a safe home for themselves and their families, just the way we want it. To put it very bluntly, the refugees are kind of a boomerang effect. It is the bill Europe and the West in general has been paying primarily because of the destruction they have caused in countries like Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, and the like over the last 20 years. The use of refugees as a political tool is, of course, to be most powerfully condemned. But this is not going to take us too far. Authoritarian leaders have detected the vulnerability of Europe, its soft belly. And I assure you that they will be making use of this vulnerability and hitting and punching this soft belly anytime they find the opportunity in pursuance of their interests. European leaders may cut deals with Turkey or Belarus, deals that do not comply with the international law, but refugees will find other ways to come. They always do. Even if you build thousands of kilometers long walls and equip them with wires, drones, and other kinds of surveillance technology, just the way it happened along the Turkish-Syrian border, the refugees will come anyways. They will find other ways to come. It is simple, because if people can't find a decent life in their countries, then they will come to your country. It is as simple as that. Hence, I have two proposals that I know are easier said than done. First, just stop destroying other countries economically, politically, and by means of imperial military interventions, and then you will have less refugees. And second, start developing a pan-European and sustainable policy that would approach the refugees not as a problem of crisis management, but one of fellow human beings trying to build a decent and dignified life for themselves and their families, and I think that should be recognized as their absolute right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And the next one is, now we go to the speakers list. And the next one is Lukas Savickas from Lithuania. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, I want to thank the rapporteur and especially colleagues in Migration Committee for intensive and hard work, finding a well-balanced approach regarding this report. I have no doubt that today in the Assembly we will reach a common position, sending a clear and hopefully unanimous message to the Belarusian regime, which is instrumentalizing migration pressures on the borders of Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. The recent migration influx to Lithuania is a hybrid attack launched by the Belarusian regime. These are evident reasons to state that officials of Belarus facilitate the smuggling of migrants. Belarus regime allows and encourages migrants to legally enter Belarus and afterwards facilitates the illegal crossing of Belarus and EU border. Lithuania has repeatedly expressed its deep concern over instrumentalization of migration by Lukashenko regime, aiming to exert political pressure on Lithuania and also European Union in retaliation for the support to Belarusian people struggling for freedom and for EU sanctions imposed for harsh violations of human rights in Belarus. And as mentioned before, after Lukashenko's public statement, that he will, beginning of a quote, feed Lithuania and other neighboring states with migrants and drugs, end of a quote. The influx of irregular migrants via Belarus-Lithuania border peaked sharply. Such an influx is a challenge for Lithuania, as we have never encountered irregular migration of this extent. However, Lithuania remains committed and determined to fully comply with international human rights and humanitarian obligations in regard to all people within its jurisdiction, irrespective of legal status. Therefore, all the people are treated in compliance with Lithuania's international commitments, and we are managing the situation to the best of our abilities. No human right may become subordinate to political or geopolitical considerations. As I have mentioned in the beginning, it is of utmost importance not to fall into provocation of Belarusian regime, not to divide among ourselves. We have to reach a common position, sending a clear and unanimous message to the Belarusian regime, which is instrumentalizing migration pressure on the borders of Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. To do so, my dear colleagues, I urge you to follow the common position found by the Committee of Migration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the next one is Emanuel Stingeris, Lithuania, please.
Thank you.
It's on now. I hope so.
Yes, it's technical. Yes. It's okay.
Excellent.
So, excellent. So thank you so much, dear Chairman, especially Chairman of the Committee, and especially Anna-Maria Virolainen. The report was prepared scrupulously, balanced. It was a discussion of deep insights during the discussion inside of our committee, of the Committee on Migration this morning and before that. Thank you for listening, and thank you for integrating the experience of the current experience of those three countries facing absolutely new challenge. In the north of Europe, can you imagine, in the north of Europe, we have first time during our life such situation when a neighboring regime using the army. Every day you have a TV show when the army dressed in OMON uniforms. And Kimo, you saw that. You visited us. Army dressed in OMON uniforms. It's special KGB troops pushing with the shields the poor immigrants who become captive by the regime to Lithuanian, Latvian and Polish border. So what to do? We are just declaring we will not change our policy towards Belarusian regime, and we will not surrender to this last blackmail. Of course, we should be humane, but just our colleague said, we should be humane but not naive. In this case, being humane, remembering experience of Europe of 20th century, especially of Second World War, and trying to be humane, we should understand that we just opened the borders for thousands of our political refugees from Belarus, and we have in Vilnius a huge number of Belarusian citizens who are taking political exile, and Madam President-elect Tikhanovskaya. We have a Russian emigration, political refugees from Russia. So, and I would like to say to my Dutch colleague, it was not destabilization of Belarusian regime, it was struggle by Belarusian people to become free country like we become in the 90s. They struggled with some delay in time to be free and to have free and fair elections. And after they was refused for them to have such choice, it was established a massive terror, including the elements of attacks on the neighboring country, including the statement. Just Lucas told you about statement of President Lukashenko. It was other statement that they will steal Belarusian political refugees from Vilnius, Warsaw, and Riga, and they will bring them back to KGB prisons in Belarus, and other treatments. So, from my point of view, I would like to tell you that. Having the experience of 20th century, being humane, please understand that we are experiencing a hybrid attack by this unique, old-fashioned Joseph Stalin type regime on our borders. And we need our common approach, and we need solidarity. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. And now it's Richard Balfe from United Kingdom, please.
Thank you, Chairman. What we're facing today is the unintended but to an extent predictable consequences of the policies that we have adopted. We shouldn't be surprised that someone like President Lukashenko is behaving the way that he is, because this is the way he's behaved all the way along towards his own people and towards refugees, most of whom, incidentally, have paid to get as far as Belarus. I would like us to have a common position, but I also think we need to keep an eye on the numbers. There are more people crossing the Channel into the UK in small boats than have crossed this border. But what we do seem to lack in this resolution is a clear call for the people who are trapped in the border area to be given asylum. There are people actually dying in this no man's land, and we owe it to them to make a clear call for people to be allowed into the European Union. Once they have their EU passport, their status and some money, I predict that they will pretty soon be leaving Lithuania, Latvia and Poland, and will be found either in the middle of the English Channel or somewhere in Frankfurt, because that is the aim of many refugees, and it's quite understandable. The best speech I've heard so far was actually by Mr. Özsoy from Turkey a few minutes ago, because he put his finger on it. The reason there are refugees is largely because we have destroyed their country. Iraq has been bombed to bits by the West, and we are the cause of many of the refugees. We now have to face up to the consequences of the terrible situation that we've caused to happen in many parts of the world. Look around Afghanistan. Where is the money going to go to rebuild what was bombed to pieces by representatives of the nations that we sit here representing? So what I would say is this. Of course, we have to keep the pressure on Belarus, but we have to keep the pressure on for a new democratic election. That's the fundamental need in Belarus, a change of government at the will of the people of the country. And I think we should concentrate on that. The final point I'd make is this. If we're going to have a sound policy on Belarus, it has to be a European policy, and frankly, it has to be probably a European Union policy. Only they can summon the resources together to put together the sort of policy which is needed to have the sort of Belarus that we would like to welcome into this Assembly as the last non-member in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the next one is André Catoli in France.
Oui, merci Monsieur le Président, mes chers collègues. Je voudrais dire ici que nous devons aussi regarder et aborder cette question peut-être sous un œil qui n'est pas celui toujours de ceux et des droits et des traités qui nous régissent. Je veux dire une chose, c'est facile parfois de parler des flux de migration, y compris dans un grand pays comme la France, quand nous ne sommes pas aux frontières de l'Europe, nous ne sommes pas les premiers au contact. Nous ne pouvons pas comprendre, parfois, quand on est en France ou en Allemagne, ce qui s'est produit en Italie ou dans d'autres pays où des flux massifs sont arrivés. Alors on peut dire, bien sûr, ce pays n'est pas leur destination finale, mais nous avons Frontex. Frontex est quand même un élément très secondaire d'action et de contrôle des frontières. Moi, je veux dire toute ma solidarité avec les pays de l'Union européenne qui sont sur le front des frontières, et notamment nos amis lituaniens, nos amis estoniens et nos amis polonais. Parce que bien sûr, on doit assurer des conditions décentes aux gens qui arrivent, de base, mais on ne peut pas en faire un système d'équilibre en disant « Monsieur Loukachenko et le Bélarus se comportent mal, nous les condamnons, c'est pas bien », et ne pas aller au-delà. Nous sommes désarmés. Ça fait plusieurs fois, nous sommes désarmés parce que nous avons baissé les armes. Nous devons être clairs vis-à-vis du Bélarus. Moi, je me suis battu pour que mon pays, la France, et d'autres aussi, prennent des sanctions. Nous avons les lois Magnitsky. Quelques dizaines de personnes, c'est 20 000 personnes au Bélarus qui font tourner le système. Nous connaissons les noms, nous connaissons les listes. Ce sont les gens qui régulièrement fraudent et tiennent ce pays dans la dictature. Il faut être clair, comme il faut être clair qu'il nous manque dans nos instruments, face à ces nouvelles formes hybrides, un instrument précis, ce que j'appellerais un crime de traite humaine d'État. Ça a été rappelé par notre collègue grec. Effectivement, M. Erdogan a utilisé. Ça ne veut pas dire qu'il n'y a pas des migrants qui ne veulent pas venir en Europe. Mais après, en faire une arme de déstabilisation, voire demain de démocratisation de pays, est quelque chose de proprement scandaleux. Je me rappelle, il y a quelques années, plusieurs centaines de migrants étaient passés par le nord-ouest de la Russie en vélo pour rejoindre la Norvège. 800 personnes en quelques jours. Simplement parce qu'il y avait un règlement norvégien qui disait que les gens qui franchissaient la frontière en vélo, on ne pouvait pas les arrêter. Je crois, dès qu'il y a une faille, ou même une ouverture dans notre système, les pays autoritaires, les pays autocratiques en profitent. Et je crois que là, il y a une arme massive de destruction de la souveraineté des États et de la démocratie qui est en jeu. Et je crois qu'il faut aller beaucoup plus loin dans ce que nous disons et dans ce que nous préconisons. Merci.
Thank you very much. And next one is Markus Wiechel, Sweden. No link seems to be so. Is he on the line? He's online. Okay, coming.
All right, thank you, Mr. President. The tragic events recently played out before us in Belarus is indeed something unheard of. An aging dictator steeped in old-time Soviet thinking and in a position of absolute power for almost 3 decades unlawfully forced a foreign airliner to divert onto Belarus territory. He did this so that he could capture a brave passenger on board and put him in prison simply for using the fundamental right of speaking up against a barbaric regime. The same fate befalls hundreds and maybe even thousands of peaceful demonstrators protesting against the dictatorship across the country. When various European countries and the European Union in response introduced sanctions against the regime, Lukashenko's response was to incite faraway nations to send migrants to Belarus for direct passage into neighboring Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia. The Belarus regime is therefore violating international law by undermining the stability of its neighbors and exploiting innocent would-be immigrants. The targeted countries respond by closing and strengthening their own borders with Belarus against irregular entry and by declaring a state of emergency in parts of their territories. The migrants soon find themselves stuck in a kind of no man's land, unable either to progress or retreat back into the, by this time, sealed Belarus territory. The steps taken by the countries targeted by Lukashenko seem to me wholly justified and correct in their reaction. It must be the absolute right of sovereign countries to have their final say over who can and who cannot immigrate. Indeed, the international community has largely agreed that this response, showing that the year 2021 is not the year 2015. when mass irregular migration was more the norm than the exception. Meanwhile, the Council of Europe's Human Rights Court has ruled that the immigrants caught in the border zone must be supplied with the necessary means of survival until a longer-term solution can be found, such as a safe return to their home countries, unless, of course, they have the right to asylum. This, of course, is good, and there has been enough suffering as it is on account of the Belarusian dictator and their neighboring countries affected, as well as the courageous, oppressed people of Belarus. And they deserve our continued unflinching support. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. And the next one is Lord Leslie Griffiths, United Kingdom.
Mr. Chairman, I'm still unfamiliar with the technology.
Don't worry, we'll have time.
Good. Mr. Chairman and colleagues, it's a privilege to be standing here to contribute to this debate. I'd like to begin by congratulating Violaine and Anne-Marie for this report, which I think is extremely well balanced. It does set out the duties and responsibilities both of those who are at the borders, being brought to the borders, and those who bring them to the borders on the one hand, and the infrastructural needs for receiving them in a due and dignified manner. It can't be surprising, with the increase in numbers reported in this paperwork, that the structures already in existence are not enough to deal with the problems. I'm choosing not to take the great geopolitical view of what might have led to this or where this might go. There is a problem now, an existential need now, to strengthen the modalities at the borders between Belarus and the three countries under consideration, so that, first of all, we can take such measures as are necessary to repel what's happening from the Belarusian end, and secondly, to deal humanely with what happens when people cross the borders into Lithuania, Latvia, and Poland. We must understand that we are dealing with a rogue element in Lukashenko, a joker even. As the previous speaker said, we remember the Ryanair flight that didn't in the end get as far as Lithuania. We remember the shipping of people as reported in these papers, bringing them deliberately from such a variety of backgrounds, not just the ones that we destroyed, as mentioned by an earlier speaker, but from all over the place, in order to pose a threat at the border. Nor must we forget the imprisonment of so many people across the land. I sponsor a young man who's just had his 17th birthday in solitary confinement. So we are dealing with something larger than life and more difficult than normal procedures are expected to cope with. And all the passion in the world will do nothing to solve the problem until we help those faced by the problem to deal properly with what they're faced by. The Geneva Convention has one element that I want to stress, just one. It is that those who are not on the front line should be generous and show solidarity with those who are on the front line. And if the European Council believes in anything, it is that the strong help the weak in their moment of need. It's no good protesting, no good showing passion, unless these gestures of solidarity give expression to our capacity to deliver not only warm words, but viable solutions.
Thanks very much. And the next one is Mr. Uldis Budrikis from Latvia.
Thank you, Chairman. Dear colleagues, it is a shame sometimes that sometimes all the historical knowledge and experience of the Baltic Poles, Ukrainians, who were molested for half a century in the regime, the Soviet Union, is taken for granted. Sometimes this resource is greatly undervalued. but not this time, so I'm saying thank you for Madam Rapporteur for trying to get a well-balanced report. This speech I have prepared for the Assembly is a repetition, and I think that's why we are here, so we can remind you, our colleagues, what is happening on our borders. Colleagues, on the outside borders of the European Union, there's a hybrid attack. I cannot emphasize this enough, that this is not a refugee crisis. International refugee terms clearly state that refugees can apply for asylum in the first country they are coming from their country to the first safe country. And Belarus is not persecuting the migrants. On the contrary, they are lightening the visa terms and brings them to borders and getting straight flights to Belarus and Minsk. When a person commits human trafficking, he should go to jail. But when a whole system, a regime supports human trafficking for geopolitical reasons, it gets just few paragraphs on this issue. So this should be the emphasis on the matter. And these are not just accusations. Those are stone-cold facts. And even in the report, Madam Rapporteur stated that when in Belarus, they were transferred by cars or other transport to the border, escorted by masked military men. The next sentence just started off a little misleading by not seeing the elephant in the room. It does not only appear to show, it is a fact that the flow of migrants towards the borders of Latvia, Lithuania and Poland are artificially organized and backed by Lukashenko's troops. Dear colleagues, we all understand that border safety, security of Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, the EU and NATO altogether must come first. It is our duty to safeguard it. This war is not performed by tanks and guns anymore. Now it is performed with instrumentalizing people's freedoms for hybrid attacks and operations. In a sense, it is a shame that the resolution is far from being tough on Lukashenko. It is a shame that we in this assembly don't call Lukashenko, his regime, international human traffickers, smugglers. Support the resolution, but keep in mind that the elephant is still in the room. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next one is Jette Christensen, Norway. Jette, please.
Dear colleagues, human beings are being used as weapons in a proxy attack in our continent in this moment. Our common human rights are not something that should be used against sanctions. When people are seeking asylum because their safety is threatened, we have an obligation to make sure to treat every asylum seeker with the rules and systems that are transparent and according to international standards. Human rights and respect for international rule of law are only worth something if they are respected in times of crisis. It is crucial that the Council of Europe assists the member states in question to establish the systems that can make sure that reception of the asylum seekers are treated humane and that they get the proper information they need to seek asylum. That being said, President and colleagues, we would not have had this debate and we would not be in this situation if it wasn't for the crucial situation of human rights in Belarus. The undermining of human rights in this country needs to stop immediately. I would like to repeat the words of the presidential statement in the situation at the EU's external borders with Belarus. This assembly should and are with this statement condemning and rejecting Belarus's use of migratory pressure its contribution to the organization of illegal border crossing, and its attempt to instrumentalize human beings for political purpose. Because that is what is happening. And I am proud to be in this debate and a part of an assembly that has the knowledge and also has the courage to address a hybrid attack when they see one, and address this not as a migrant question, because it's not a question about migration. It is a question about Belarus, it is a question about human rights, and it's a question about our common dignity as a continent. I urge the Assembly to support this report, and I congratulate the rapporteurs on being capable to see and address a hybrid attack when they see it. Thank you very much for having this debate. Thank you very much for being an assembly who dares to take the important debates and address them for what they are. In these words is the last words I would say in this assembly, since I'm stepping back, but I would like to say that this case is a very good example on how the European Council stands for what's right when it's needed. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Jette. And now next one is Leonid Slutsky from Russia. Please. Ja poinen distancija ili kak? Пожалуйста, вам нужно спросить, что они дают вам возможность. Leonid, ты слушаешь? Открывай линию. You should open, press the ask the floor. Let's do so that we move to the next speaker, and we will allow Mr. Slutsky later on if he gets a line to be operated. Seems to be so. Now, Krista Baumann, Latvia.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, it is important that we recognize that the situation on the border with Belarus is not a result of unfortunate circumstances. It has been intentionally designed by an illegitimate president in a desperate attempt to hang on to power and retaliate against the sanctions imposed against his regime by the EU and other democratic countries. These aggressive actions of Belarus authorities cause serious challenges to security of European countries. The aim of the Belarus regime is to destabilize the situation in the region so we would lift sanctions, stop supporting Belarusian civil society, democratic opposition and free media. To those ends, let me remind you, as have some of the previous speakers, Lukashenko hijacked a civilian plane. And more recently, his regime is recruiting people from third countries, mostly Iraq, with false promises into Belarus with official tourist visas. These trips are organized by Belarusian state-owned tourism companies, using state airlines and airlines from high-risk countries. The guests are housed in Belarusian state-owned hotels and later escorted towards the US border. Belarusian authorities are often taking away their travel documents and preventing them from returning to their countries of origin. Dear colleagues, who does that? We know, human traffickers. In other words, Lukashenko regime is running a state-sponsored human trafficking operation, cynically using the most vulnerable people, children, pregnant women, and dumping them in the forests and swamplands in cold weather without any help. It is him and his regime that is directly responsible for the dire situation and should be held accountable to resolve it. Meanwhile, my country has and will also in the future honor our international obligations with respect to international human rights and humanitarian law, including consider the recommendations in this report. We will also strengthen our external borders, as is both our right and responsibility. But to stop this situation, prevent escalation, and save innocent people from further suffering, we must not forget and address the cause of it. Stop Lukashenko not play along his cynical games using lives of real people. I thank the rapporteur, and I also thank you, dear colleagues, for your support and your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Krista. And the next one is Arkadiusz Mularchuk, Poland. Is he around here? Online?
Mr. President.
Please go on.
I would like to thank the Assembly in its activity for having decided to consider the situation on increased migration pressure on borders on Latvia, Lithuania and Poland with Belarus. We have proposed a debate to draw peace attention to the unprecedented action and pressure exerted on the EU by migrants. First of all, I would like to state very clearly that the current text in the eyes of potential readers may create a misleading impression that the urgent migration situation has been created by Latvia, Lithuania and Poland. It is not the case. By protecting its border with Belarus, Poland fulfills its obligation towards the EU to protect the external borders of the Union. Dear colleagues, it should be clearly emphasized who is responsible for the situation on the border. Belarus has stopped cooperating bilaterally with us on border protection, readmission and migration management. Moreover, Belarus rejected to accept humanitarian aid from Poland for migrants staying on its territory. We cannot be accused of lack of goodwill and lack of attempts at dialogue on these issues. The migration pressure has been cynically orchestrated by the regime in Minsk in response to EU sanctions. We should clearly state that the Lukashenko regime is using migrants and asylum seekers to create a crisis in EU member states and generate a debate that would draw the focus away from the current human situation in Belarus. It should be openly said that it's the hybrid action included elements on disinformation in order to stabilize the situation on the border with Belarus. The Belarusian authorities have created a whole mechanism of the migration tourist industry inside the country. According to the testimonies of people who have illegally crossed the Polish-Belarusian border, the Belarusian authorities have been involved in pushing people admitted to its territory to the territory of the EU, having charged them for their journey. Dear colleagues, we must not put the cart in front of the horse and confuse the order of things. Attaching the utmost importance to full protection of human rights of asylum seekers and migrants, the Assembly must clearly and unambiguously determine who is responsible for the current situation. We are opposed to the political instrumentalization of the migration issue. This policy is part of the pattern of using political blackmail against us and against Europe as a whole, trying to beat one's own political interest at the expense of the victims. I would like to kindly ask you to support our amendments to the point 10.3, which was rejected by the committee. Thank you very well for attention.
Thank you very much. And next one, I understood Mr. Slutsky is not yet, no connections. If Mr. Slutsky gets the line, we will allow him to also to speak because technical reasons now I can see. Then next one is, if I read it correctly, Mrs. Laima Andrikiene, Lithuania. Please, Laima, where you are sitting here in the front, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I would like to thank our rapporteur, Madame Anne-Marie Virolainen, for the draft report. Our joint efforts to improve the wording of the draft were successful. Now our draft report looks much better balanced. And I hope and I wish that as the result, we will have objective and forward-looking document. Those who are familiar with the situation at the eastern border of the EU know that we deal with something new. Countries, members of the European Union, namely Latvia, Lithuania and Poland, experience a hybrid attack from Belarus, when human beings from countries like Syria, Iraq, African countries are misused by Belarusian regime to violate EU borders. This lasting human trafficking exercise is a response of the Belarusian dictatorship to European Union sanctions against Belarus imposed for the harsh violation of human rights. As the result, in Lithuania only, we already have more than 4,000 illegal immigrants, quite often pushed by force by the Belarusian forces to cross the border and to enter our territory from Belarus. In response to the current situation at the border with Belarus, we call on the governments of member states of the Council of Europe and you, dear colleagues, to support Latvia, Lithuania and Poland. We call on the authorities of Belarus to stop without delay the instrumentalization of migrants, refugees and asylum seekers in particular, and stop facilitating travel to Belarus of third country nationals under false pretenses of tourism. We in Lithuania are in a position to fulfill all our EU membership obligations, as well as other international commitments, and cooperate with international agencies in order to solve this problem of our common concern. Stop Lukashenko. Thank you.
Next one is, thanks Laima. Next one is Mr. Anton Gomez Reino, United Left, actually, Spain. Is he not around? He doesn't seem to be around. He has left. Okay. Next one is then Alexander Bashkin, Russia. Пожалуйста.
Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги. Вопросы, поднятые в докладе, бесспорно актуальны. И многие позиции сбалансированы. Заслуживает внимания та часть документа, которая призывает власти Латвии, Литвы и Польши обеспечить права тех, кто стремится въехать на их территорию. Вероятно, в проекте резолюции следовало бы упомянуть о решении Европейского суда по правам человека обязать Польшу и Латвию обеспечить едой, водой, одеждой и медицинской помощью беженцев. Коллеги, содержание некоторых выступлений вызывает вопрос, почему в возникшем кризисе коллеги обвиняют только одну Белоруссию? Разве Белоруссия устроила гуманитарный кризис на Ближнем Востоке и севере Африки? Эта Белоруссия в составе НАТО участвовала в разрушении государственности Ирака, Ливии и ряда других стран. Разве Белоруссия 20 лет воевала в Афганистане? Путь, упрощающий ситуацию к одностороннему обвинению одной Белоруссии, является тупиковым. В этом смысле я разделяю выступление уважаемого лорда Балфа. Удивляет практика двойных стандартов при рассмотрении этой ситуации. Почему европейские страны активно осуждали Италию, Грецию, Венгрию за их позицию по отношению к беженцам, но при этом не замечают это отношение к беженцам в Латвии, Литве или Польше? Такое же недоумение вызывает ситуация, когда делегаты из этих стран периодически осуждают Российскую Федерацию за некие вымышленные проблемы с правами человека на ее территории, при этом ни разу не побывав ни в Москве, ни в Крыму, ни на Кавказе. Хотя, чтобы увидеть настоящую проблему с правами человека, им достаточно посетить собственную границу и увидеть там сидящих на голой земле, окруженных вооруженными людьми несчастных беженцев, лишенных свободы, возможности передвижения и еды. Посмотрите, Беларусь критикуют за недостаточную охрану силовыми ведомствами своей границы. Но полицейских действительно не хватает. Они вынуждены охранять население внутри страны от массовых беспорядков, периодически, кстати, провоцируемых с той же территории Литвы. Конечно, и белорусским властям следует максимализировать свои усилия для того, чтобы смягчить непростую ситуацию со скоплением беженцев на границах с балтийскими странами и Польшей. Коллеги, это очень плохо. Пока страны увлекаются своими политическими разногласиями, страдают ни в чем не повинные люди. Уверен, что приграничным государствам Европейского Союза следовало бы решать вопросы незаконной миграции в контактах с белорусскими властями, которые неоднократно заявляли о готовности к взаимодействию. Последний пример – заявление главы МИД Белоруссии господина Макея с трибуны Организации Объединенных Наций 27 сентября, где он снова подтвердил, что белорусская сторона предлагает Европейскому Союзу провести консультации по вопросам нелегальной миграции. Но Евросоюз, к сожалению, отказывается. Коллеги, призываю отойти от практики угроз и давления на одну из сторон и перейти к диалогу. Так, возможно, удастся помочь людям. Большое спасибо за внимание.
Спасибо. Next one is Yelizaveta Jasko from Ukraine. She doesn't seem to be in the hall, if I see correctly. Usually she's actively here, but not now. No, not in the line either. No, no. Next one is Ivona Arendt from Poland. Absence. Also seems to be late hours in the... Okay. Problem? No? Polonia, online. Thanks. Ivona, the floor is yours. Great.
Situation on the border of Poland, Lithuania and Latvia is unprecedented one, which goes far beyond the issues related to migration and the basic rights the civilized countries provide to all those seeking security and asylum in the EU. Alexander Lukashenko's group, inspired by its direct allies, prepared the entire process of transferring immigrants to the border with the Republic of Poland, Lithuania and Latvia. Additional flights were organized through tourist offices for economic immigrants who, thanks to the support of the Belarusian authorities, came directly to the border of the European Union. The immigrants were ruthlessly deceived. In their opinion, the road to richer countries of the European Union, such as Germany or France, will be open and they themselves will be surrounded by broad social support. In search of a better life, they left their homes and risked entering the European Union illegally. By performing manipulations that violate basic human rights, Belarus is trying to destabilize the situation on the border with the countries of the European Union. Deep solidarity and sensitivity to values and human rights, which is the basis for the functioning of the community, today is ruthlessly used against countries such as Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia. During the joint conference, the governments of these countries adopted an on-flight position commending the use of vulnerable people to achieve political goals. We expect support from all members of the Council of Europe at this difficult moment when the fate of the security and integrity of the European Union borders is at stake. As a community of democratic countries committed to the highest standards of human rights, we must speak with one firm voice in order to ensure until and the shared values we represent. Belarus must end destabilization and provide humanitarian conditions to all who need it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next one is Oleksiy Goncharenko, Ukraine, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, dear colleagues. We are discussing now extremely important issue. And really what we see, it's a weaponizing of people, weaponizing of migrants. What can be worse in the human life? Just tell me, what crime could be worse than this? And I just want to stress your attention on the speech of Mr. Bashkin from Russian Federation. It was clear confession that Lukashenko is not alone in what he is doing. Because Mr. Bashkin said all the myths from Lukashenko, that there are tourists from Iraq, they came because Western countries destroyed Iraq. That's why they are so active to see the beautiful Minsk. And then they decided, oh, beautiful Minsk, we can go to Lithuania, it's also beautiful. So we can cross the forest and everything will be great there. So it was complete mockery. Then Mr. Bashkin told us, yes, Belarus authorities could not guard their border because policemen are very busy defending people inside the country. I can tell you with what they are busy. 2 days ago in Minsk, KGB agent, yes, Lukashenko still call it KGB, killed a person, IT man, in Minsk, inside his apartment, because they were looking for opposition. They came inside. He started to shoot. He killed one of KGB agents, and they killed him. Just imagine what is happening in the middle of Europe. We know that Lukashenko tortured people. We know that he kidnapped the plane with people in the skies of Belarus. And now he is using people as a weapon in hybrid war. And it's not war against Lithuania, Latvia and Poland. It's war against all of us. All countries who are civilized, who consider themselves to have some values, and we need to react. And the reaction should be strong. We need finally to have in our Council of Europe a permanent group or body which will work on Belarus from day to day, because that's very important. We need finally to have put sanctions, new sanctions, all our countries. You all are members of the parliaments of your countries. Let's raise these questions in your parliaments. You can create groups for democratic Belarus, like we did it in Ukraine, Lithuania, Poland. Please do it in your countries. And let's put sanctions on Lukashenko, and real sanctions. Full blockade of Belarus. That's the only way. Full economical blockade. No one ton of fertilizers from Belarus. No one car from Belarus. No one ferry from Belarus. No one bus from Belarus. Nothing. We should stop it. We should kill this regime of Lukashenko, like anti-human regime. Regime which is killing people inside the country, which is a great challenge to the security of the whole world. So we should react now, or we will have new crises and we will just debate. It's not a question of debate, it's a question of action, if we really have these values. Thank you very much. И живе Беларусь!
Thank you very much. And the next one is Monica Bartos, Hungary. She seems to be not here. No, online. Actually, we are in a good situation that we still have actually time to discuss, and I'm now flexible, which I haven't been before because I have stopped the list sometimes in between. We are actually at the end of the list. And there's one request made from speech to do additional, and I'm allowing it, because it seems that we are having good time. So, Rustem Umerov from Ukraine, you have the floor. That was an additional information that he would like to state, and if there are room, and there are room principally now, if you want to discuss on this item. No. No. Okay, now we are at the end of the report itself, and we will have the final statements first by the rapporteur. Isn't it so? Yes. Rapporteur Anne-Marie, the floor is now yours. So, and I give you enough 3 minutes because of the time we had enough time. Don't worry.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, I would like to thank all members in all delegations for your valuable views and support. And I would also like to present once more my gratefulness for all the help and support I got from the Secretariat as rapporteur. And then I would like to conclude the discussion by presenting my 3 points to the Assembly for overcoming the present challenge at the borders. Those are, first, holding Belarus accountable over its reprehensible policy it has chosen to conduct towards its neighbor countries and the stability of Europe. Second, understanding the pressure Latvia, Lithuania and Poland experience, and at the same time support a course of action that minds the human rights of the people who are stranded at the border. And last but not least, ensuring that UNHCR and organizations providing humanitarian assistance and legal aid are provided with unhindered access to migrants, asylum seekers and refugees, including at the border. Your message today has been very clear. Human beings are not bargaining chips, and playing international politics for national political gain by instrumentalizing vulnerable people and stomping their human rights is intolerable. And I'm happy that we as Assembly continue following the human rights situation in Belarus in the framework on its ongoing report on call for an inclusive political process in Belarus, and that's why I'm in favor of amendment number 6. And when our uniformity behind our values is pushed by such as Belarus is doing now, so our response is to become even more unified behind the values which bind us together. So these values are universal and apply to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. And now the committee chair, you have also the role to speak 3 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Vice-président. Mesdames, Messieurs, chers collègues. Ce rapport est une réponse à l'évolution de la situation des pressions migratoires et d'asile accrues aux frontières de la Lettonie, de la Lituanie et de la Pologne avec le Bélarus. Des pressions orchestrées par les autorités du Bélarus en réponse aux sanctions de l'Union européenne contre ce pays. Cette situation à la frontière du Bélarus soulève un certain nombre de préoccupations graves, en particulier en matière de droits de l'homme. Je félicite Madame Virolainen qui, dans ce rapport, a réussi à clarifier la situation d'urgence actuelle et à proposer les recommandations très concrètes concernant la sauvegarde des droits de l'homme dans la situation d'un tel afflux inattendu de migrants et de demandeurs d'asile dans les États membres du Conseil de l'Europe et de l'Union européenne. Pour moi, il y a dans ce dossier 3 éléments importants. Premièrement, on doit réagir clairement quand un État instrumentalise des migrants, des réfugiés et des demandeurs d'asile, en particulier ceux se trouvant en extrême vulnérabilité. Deuxièmement, la gestion efficace des frontières par les États membres du Conseil de l'Europe devrait s'accompagner de réponses adéquates quant aux droits des demandeurs d'asile. Il faut respecter le principe de non-refoulement et l'interdiction des expulsions collectives, garantir l'accès à l'asile, assurer des conditions d'accueil adéquates et le droit à un recours effectif, le tout conformément à la CEDH. Troisièmement, dans les situations d'urgence, tous les États membres doivent se montrer solidaires et fournir une assistance financière et technique urgente pour garantir la protection nécessaire des migrants, des demandeurs d'asile et des réfugiés. Je tiens, pour terminer, à remercier chaleureusement Madame Anne-Marie Virolainen, la rapporteure, pour la qualité de son travail réalisé en un temps record, et également les membres de la Commission des migrations, des réfugiés et des personnes déplacées pour leur implication lors de l'examen de ce rapport. Et bien entendu, mes remerciements vont également au secrétariat. Merci pour votre attention.
Thank you very much. And now the debate is closed. we move to the more decision-making states of the report and urgent debate. When it's question about urgent debate, we do have a report, as you know, a resolution, and the Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons has presented a draft resolution, and which was introduced, obviously, by Mrs. Virolainen. There are actually 6 amendments made for the report and for the resolution, we could say so. And we go then not in numerical order, but in the order as they come to the text. So follow it. You do have the notes, obviously, so let's follow it carefully. We start with the amendment number 2. And I call Mr. Savickas, who is the first signature there, signing it first, to support the amendment. You have 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. It is already clearly stated in the report that the hybrid attack by Belarusian authorities are resulting in increased migration and asylum pressures. Therefore, by this amendment, it is suggested to replace the word increased with the word instrumentalized. However, the rapporteur in the committee today this morning suggested that such word is already used in the relevant paragraph. Therefore, I agree to withdraw this amendment, but at the same time, I am reminding dear colleagues that identical amendment will be soon discussed in relation to amending the title of this report, for which I will ask later for the support.
So the amendment has been withdrawn. We shouldn't discuss that at all. Oh, yes, of course. Does anyone speak against the withdrawal process? Let's put it in those terms.
Does anyone else wish to support this amendment?
Okay, that's the same other way around, that once everyone wants to support the amendment. Let's put it in those terms. Either against the withdrawal or supporting it. But it doesn't seem to be so. It's unanimously taken away. Let's move to another amendment number 5, next amendment number 5. That's technically more complicated, I can guarantee it. Beforehand, one technical problem is there, that my signature is in this amendment by technical error. And by saying this, I don't take any positions on the substance of the amendment, but there was a technical error that my name is there. And now I ask Mr. Pisco support amendment number 5. He is the first signing it. Why I say it's technically more complicated is that he doesn't seem to be here to support it, but I have been informed that Lord Griffiths wishes to propose an oral sub-amendment as follows. In Amendment 5, delete the second sentence. That's
We cannot take the sub-amendment if nobody supports the main amendment. Someone has to support the main amendment.
Now it's more technically difficult. It seems to be so that somebody should support the main amendment in order to make the... Tini Cox, please. You helped. You know the technique.
I would like, Mr. President, to move it formally.
Now the formal move had been made, and now I can proceed to the issue of Mr. Lord Griffiths, that he proposed an oral sub-amendment as follows. In Amendment 5, which Tini Cox formally supported just now, delete the second sentence. And in my opinion, and the Secretariat's opinion, lawyer's opinion, this sub-amendment meets the criteria of our rules, so we can do that. Is there any objection to the oral sub-amendment being debated? Because if there are at least 10, then we cannot even discuss about this one. But nobody is being against the oral sub-amendment, so we can now move to the oral sub-amendment. And Lord Griffiths, do you want to speak on behalf of the oral sub-amendment? Please.
And I hadn't expected the disappearance of the person who would have put this, but I'm happy from memory to say that we have shortened the original proposal on the grounds that what is left would have seemed to go beyond the capacity of this Council in respect of actions being required of the European Union. So it was a tidying up exercise which I think the committee was quite happy about.
I understood exactly the same way. And now, what is the opinion of Mr. Cox, who is now supporting him? And please, I understood it was very technical support, so almost guess your answer. What is this? Please, Mr. Cox. You will agree also with that shortening the text. And I now put the oral sub-amendment to the vote. The vote is open. It takes a bit time because we do have both in hall the voting procedure going on as well as in online. So, c'est bon. The vote is closed and the result. The sub-amendment is agreed, 45 plus, 1 against, for 8 abstentions. We can now move to the main amendment as amended. Is there somebody who would like to speak against? Okay. Instead, the committee is obviously supportive. Yes, committee.
Je voulais dire qu'il y a un deuxième sous-amendement. Non? Il a été retiré? OK. Alors la commission est favorable à cet amendement sous-amendé.
Thank you. So understood. And now we must vote about the amendment as it is now changed. So the vote is open. The vote is closed and the result. The amendment is agreed by clear majority, 43, 6, 9 abstentions. This amendment is approved. We move to more simple amendments, I would say so in technical terms at least. Amendment number 3, call Mr. Mulacic to support amendment number 3. The first person who signed it. Is there anybody else to support the amendment? Groups? Does anyone else want to support? Okay. Okay.
Support.
Technical support done. Does anyone want to speak against the amendment? Okay, the floor is yours.
I will speak in Greek, but because I think that we are going to make a major mistake, I would ask from my colleagues to wear their headphones. Αυτό το οποίο αναφέρει εδώ είναι ότι θα πρέπει να αντικαταστήσουμε τη λέξη άσυλο από τη λέξη διεθνή προστασία. Το άσυλο είναι ένας όρος ο οποίος είναι πάρα πολύ σημαντικός και νομικά κατοχυρωμένος. Εάν λοιπόν αντικαταστήσουμε τη λέξη άσυλο με τη φράση διεθνής προστασία, απλώς αδυνατίζουμε τη θέση αυτών οι οποίοι ζητούν και έχουν ανάγκη το άσυλο. Μιλάμε για ένα νομικό τεχνικό όρο, ο οποίος είναι ισχυρός και ο οποίος είναι δοκιμασμένος. Προτείνω λοιπόν να μην κάνουμε αυτό το λάθος και να αφήσουμε την έννοια του ασύλου ως έχει. Αλλιώς, αντί να προστατεύσουμε αυτούς τους ανθρώπους, τους δημιουργούμε περισσότερα προβλήματα. Ευχαριστώ.
Thank you very much. And now the committee.
La Commission était favorable à la majorité. À cet amendement, oui.
Yeah. Now we move to the vote. The vote is open. Vote is closed, and the result. (42 for, 14 against, 6 abstentions). The amendment is approved. We move to the amendment number 4, and once again, Mr. Mularczyk to support. He is here. He's not around. Online, please. Excellent.
In the current extraordinary situation of migration pressure generated by a neighboring state, this amendment reflects more accurately the situation on the ground as well as the challenges that many states are facing. This is amendment in the spirit of mutual compromise and desire to reflect the current international situation. Thank you.
Anyone against the amendment? The opinion of committee. Committee is against. Now I put the amendment to vote. Vote is closed and result. The amendment is rejected. There was 11 for, 27 against, and 15 abstention. So it's not approved. The next one is amendment number 6, and I ask Petra Bayer to support it.
Okay, there might be a connection as well, but if the connection doesn't work, I will. There is the connection, I think.
Yes, can we hear each other? Yeah. Well, I wish to move the amendment as one of the signatories.
See, is there a connection?
And I think.
No, we cannot hear. Petra, you support. Sorry, Dominic. Sorry.
Yeah,
Petra.
Sorry for that. Yeah, the movers would like to strengthen the position of the whole report with this amendment, and even if it was narrowly defeated in the committee, the rapporteur wanted it, the rapporteur supports it, so I suggest that we should strengthen the position of the report and also support the rapporteur in her opinion. Thank you.
Yes, I also recall that the rapporteur supported this amendment. Now is anybody against? Koncharenko, I see.
Dear colleagues, committee voted against this amendment, and I want to ask all of you to vote against this amendment because it proposes much weaker text. What does it mean to follow the human rights situation? We are following for more than 1 year. Where are results? No results. We need to make some permanent body. And I just want to remind you, yesterday I asked about this Mr. Sijarta, who is presiding in Council of Ministers, and he also supported this. Before Mr. Maas, German minister, also supported this. So, colleagues, let us vote against this amendment, and we will have stronger text in our resolution. Also, I would like to remind you that in the report of Alexandra Louis, which we supported overwhelmingly during the summer session, there was almost the same paragraph. So let us be forward, and let us not to change our way of thinking, and let us have a strong language against the usurper, who is Lukashenko, who is weaponizing people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Koncharenko already mentioned that committee was for this one, against the amendment. But as I understood, Petr Bayer said that the rapporteur was for this amendment. So then here we are. Okay, now I put the issue on the vote. So those who are voting, the vote is open. No, the vote is closed, and the result. For, 32 against, and 6 abstentions. It's rejected. Now we move to amendment number 1. I call Mr. Savic to support the amendment.
Thank you, Chair. While this is the last amendment, I would argue one of the most important ones here today as well. I already mentioned that rapporteur and the committee, Migration Committee, implemented significant changes to initial draft report. It is now clearly stated that hybrid attacks by Belarusian authorities are resulting in increased migration and asylum pressures. Also, the word instrumentalization is used more than once, including the call on authorities of Belarus to stop instrumentalization of migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. Therefore, I suggest to match the title of this report with the changes of the report that were implemented, replacing the word increased with the word instrumentalized. I ask for your support, dear colleagues.
Anyone wants to be against? The committee opinion?
La commission était contre.
Committee was against, but nobody spoke against. Okay, that's fine. Now let's move to the vote. We are closing the vote. (32 for, 25 against, 5 abstentions). It's approved, and now we move to the final stage of the draft resolution, where simple majority is required. And I remind you, because the technicalities are always like that one, that now we are voting about the whole resolution. And vote is now open. Vote is closed, and result. "58 for, 15 against, 8 abstentions. The resolution is approved, quite clear majority. Thanks very much. Thanks very much. Good discussion. Good debate. We move to the next item. We are on time, and the next issue is cybercrime. And I, on my behalf, say thank you very much for this plenary session. There will be other people chairing it up to the end. So next time we'll see here. Thanks very much.
Voilà, mes chers collègues, je vous prie de prendre place. On va aborder donc notre dernier point de l'ordre du jour. C'est donc le projet de deuxième protocole additionnel à la Convention sur la cybercriminalité relatif au renforcement de la coopération et de la divulgation de preuves électroniques. L'ordre du jour appelle la présentation et la discussion du rapport de M. Kamal Jafarov au nom de la Commission des questions juridiques et des droits de l'homme sur le deuxième protocole additionnel à la Convention sur la cybercriminalité relative au renforcement donc, de la coopération et de la divulgation de preuves électroniques, document 15 379, respectivement document 15 316 révisé. Le rapporteur qui doit donc nous quitter, il m'a informé, mais il y a M. Boris. Le rapporteur est encore présent, donc il dispose de 7 minutes pour la présentation de son rapport et 3 minutes pour répondre aux oratrices et orateurs à la fin de la discussion générale. Monsieur le rapporteur, vous avez la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, chers collègues. Le projet d'avis qui vous est soumis ressemble à première vue à un exercice purement technique. Mais comme les membres de la Commission des questions juridiques et des droits de l'homme l'ont entendu de la bouche des experts lors de notre audition, le projet de protocole soulève des questions considérables en matière d'état de droit et de droits de l'homme. Les dispositions les plus contestées sont celles qui introduisent la possibilité d'une coopération directe des autorités répressives avec les fournisseurs d'accès à Internet et d'autres entités privées dans d'autres États parties. Pour commencer, je voudrais rappeler l'objectif du projet de protocole sur lequel l'Assemblée a été invitée à se prononcer, à savoir faciliter la coopération internationale dans la lutte contre la cybercriminalité. Cet objectif est lui-même directement lié au respect d'état de droit et à la protection des droits fondamentaux, plus précisément les droits des victimes de la cybercriminalité. Les cybercriminels sont même profitent de la pandémie de Covid, toujours en cours, pour lancer des cyberattaques contre des hôpitaux et des laboratoires, développant des vaccins et pour utiliser abusivement des noms de domaines afin de promouvoir de faux vaccins et traitements. La cybercriminalité est donc considérée, à juste titre, par de nombreux États comme une menace sérieuse pour les droits de l'homme, l'état de droit, le fonctionnement des sociétés démocratiques et même la sécurité nationale. Il convient également de rappeler que le protocole fonctionnera dans le cadre des systèmes de justice pénale des parties avec toutes les procédures, réglementations, méthodes de transmission des données, conditions et garanties que prévoient nos systèmes de justice pénale. Cela s'applique également à la coopération directe prévue aux articles 6 et 7 du projet de protocole. Ces deux articles exigent des États parties qu'ils établissent une base juridique nationale appropriée pour l'exercice de ces pouvoirs. Dans le rapport explicatif, j'ai résumé les commentaires et les propositions d'amélioration formulées par les différentes parties prenantes. Celles-ci méritent d'être prises au sérieux. Cependant, je pense que pour que le projet de protocole remplisse son objectif, elles ne peuvent pas toutes être suivies. Lors de notre audition, les experts représentent le TCY, c'est-à-dire le comité intergouvernemental de rédaction, qui a négocié le projet de deuxième protocole, se sont opposés à toute proposition de changement. Ils veulent éviter de rouvrir un accord global qui a été difficile à obtenir après de nombreux cycles de négociations. À la lumière de leurs arguments, j'ai effectivement réduit le nombre de propositions que je pense que nous devrons soutenir. Les raisons en sont expliquées au chapitre 5 du rapport explicatif devant vous. L'Assemblée devrait en effet reconnaître que la Convention sur la cybercriminalité et ses protocoles additionnels sont confrontés à un dilemme. Leur objectif exige que le plus grand nombre possible d'États participent à la lutte contre la cybercriminalité. Les cybercriminels ne connaissent pas de frontières, mais les systèmes juridiques des États sont très différents, y compris dans le domaine du droit pénal et de la protection des données. La Convention et ses protocoles ne peuvent donc que fixer des normes minimales qui doivent être mises en œuvre par tous les États participants. En même temps, ces textes peuvent laisser la possibilité aux États plus avancés de prévoir des protections plus fortes. Mais ces normes plus élevées de protection des données ne doivent pas à leur tour mettre en péril l'objectif commun de la Convention et de ces protocoles, à savoir rendre plus efficace la coopération internationale dans la lutte contre la cybercriminalité. Je trouve que le deuxième protocole additionnel établit en principe un équilibre raisonnable, mais je ne partage pas l'avis de représentants de TCY selon lequel l'Assemblée devrait s'abstenir de faire de propositions d'amendement. Dans les avis précédents sur des projets de convention, y compris sur la convention initiale sur la cybercriminalité elle-même, l'Assemblée n'a pas non plus accepté d'être une simple chambre d'enregistrement. Comme vous pouvez le constater dans le texte qui vous est présenté, les autres propositions du projet d'avis sont très constructives. Elles visent à améliorer la protection des droits de l'homme et en particulier les droits à la vie privée, ainsi que les droits fondamentaux en procès équitable. Il s'agit notamment du droit d'être assisté par un avocat, également lors des séances de témoignage en ligne, du respect des privilèges et immunités de certaines professions, dont celle d'avocat, et de la possibilité que les instruments prévus par les projets de protocole puissent être utilisés non seulement par l'accusation, mais aussi par la défense. Le temps nous manque pour entrer dans les détails à ce stade, mais je serai heureux de répondre à toutes vos questions. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Merci, Monsieur le rapporteur. On passe alors à la discussion générale, respectivement aux orateurs au nom des groupes politiques. Et le premier orateur, c'est Monsieur Kamulchuk Yuri de l'Ukraine au nom du PPE. Il ne semble plus être en salle. Non. Alors on passe au second.
Yes.
Ah, le voilà, le voilà. Vous avez la parole, monsieur.
Mr. Chairman, dear colleagues, thank you for a great job, Mr. Kamal Jafarov and Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights. More than 500,000 cyber crimes were registered in 2020 only in Europe. Hackers have new goals, portals related to the production and distribution of vaccines, training platforms and servers that allow them to work in home office mode. Digital blackmail is a new form of cybercrime. The cybercrime detection rate in 2020 was low at 32%. In general crime statistics, this figure is twice high, 58%. And this despite the fact that many enterprises affected by the criminals' action of hackers do not file a report with the police. Therefore, nothing is known about many cybercrimes. The threat of blackmail on the internet is especially high, for which special programs are used. Hackers can additionally threaten information leakage from computers attacked by such a virus, demanding a ransom from their owners. The cybercrimes in this scenario is successful, if successful, bring great profits to cyber criminals. Strategically important infrastructure facilities should be better protected with the help of appropriate laws. IT security should be strengthened in all areas, at enterprises, in government agencies, and in households. Most of the cyber criminals are located in Eastern Europe and above all in Russia. China is using classical economic espionage, hunting for patents to strengthen the national economy. North Korea's interests are aimed at implementing its own nuclear program. All this often happens at the expense of private firms, which incur huge losses as a result of cyber attacks. The damage done in this way in Europe last year amounted to more than 2 billion euros. Cyber criminals gain access to personal data. Hackers work alone and in organized groups. There is an entire underground industry that allows you to purchase everything you need to commit cybercrime. An important tool used to cybercrime are stolen personal and banking data. Names, addresses, credit card numbers, hundreds of millions of such data have been stolen from social networks. In January 2021, it was possible to detect and neutralize one of the most dangerous programs used by hackers, Emotet. This became possible thanks to the cooperation of the special services of 8 countries: Germany, Netherlands, Ukraine, Lithuania, France, Great Britain, Canada, and USA. The purpose of the second additional protocol to the Convention on Cybercrime is to provide sharper tools to investigate cybercrime and obtain justice for victims. We welcome the adoption of this document and stand ready to facilitate the ratification of new amendments to the Convention on Cybercrime in all countries. Thank you, colleagues.
Merci, Monsieur Kamelchuk. Et je passe maintenant la parole au représentant de l'ALDE. Ça, c'est Monsieur André Gattolin de la France. Monsieur Gattolin, vous avez la parole.
Oui, merci Monsieur le Président. Mes chers collègues, la Convention de Budapest sur la cybercriminalité représente une avancée importante dans la lutte contre l'exploitation des technologies de l'information à des fins criminelles. 66 pays l'ont déjà ratifiée, dont 21 qui ne sont pas membres de notre organisation. C'est une convention ouverte et c'est quelque chose de très important. Tous les États membres du Conseil de l'Europe l'ont ratifié à 2 exceptions près, l'Irlande et la Fédération de Russie, qui ne l'a même pas signée. Ce succès de la Convention de Budapest montre que les États ont conscience du risque que représente la cybercriminalité, une grave menace pour les droits de l'homme, pour l'état de droit et pour le fonctionnement des sociétés démocratiques, ainsi que la sécurité nationale. Depuis son ouverture aux signatures en 2001, la cybercriminalité a explosé, rendant nécessaire une adaptation de la Convention. Je me rappelle en 2014, quand j'ai parlé d'une étude qui projetait une fraude, un effet, un coût de la cybercriminalité en 2020 à 2000 milliards de dollars, certains de mes collègues m'ont ri au nez. En 2020, en réalité, elle était près de 6 000 $ et on projette plus de 10 000 $ de pertes, en tous les cas de coûts pour la société et pour les entreprises en 2025. C'est pour ça qu'il est important d'avoir un protocole additionnel. Mais le faire n'est jamais une opération simple, compte tenu de la diversité des ordres juridiques des États partis à la Convention. La résolution proposée par notre rapporteur souligne à juste titre ce point lorsqu'elle énonce que la Convention et ses protocoles peuvent uniquement établir des normes minimales de protection qui doivent être mises en œuvre par l'ensemble des États participants, tout en laissant aux États les plus avancés la possibilité de prévoir des protections renforcées au profit de leurs citoyens. Pour autant, ces normes plus rigoureuses ne doivent pas compromettre l'objectif commun de la Convention et de ses protocoles. C'est précisément une ligne de crête dont je mesure la complexité et la difficulté des négociations qui ont lieu sur ce second protocole additionnel, l'AVER. Je rappelle en outre que s'agissant des États membres de l'Union européenne, ceux-ci ont d'abord engagé les négociations séparément avant que, dans un deuxième temps, la Commission européenne soit chargée de négocier pour le compte de l'ensemble des États membres. Aussi, le texte issu des négociations comprend de réelles avancées pour lutter contre la cybercriminalité et faciliter l'accès aux preuves électroniques. Alors notre rapporteur suggère quelques améliorations en vue de renforcer notamment le principe de proportionnalité, ce que je comprends bien, et d'autres éléments. Cet objectif est louable au regard des débats que nous avons eus en commission des questions juridiques. J'y souscris, à une réserve près toutefois, ne pas faire tomber le texte issu de négociations difficiles menées ces dernières années, qui aboutit, comme le souligne la résolution, à un équilibre raisonnable. Le mieux est toujours souhaitable, mais il est parfois, hélas, l'ennemi du bien. Soyons-en tous conscients au moment du vote. Merci.
Merci, Monsieur Gattolin. Et je passe maintenant la parole au représentant du groupe CE. Ça, c'est Monsieur Goncharenko Oleksiy de l'Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear colleagues, I want to thank the rapporteur for a very good report on extremely important topic, because that's the 21st century, and dear colleagues, and really cyber activity and cyber attacks and cyber wars are something which we face in our time. I just want to remind you that last week there was a statement by the European Union High Representative on Foreign Policy, Monsieur Borrell, and I want to quote it. Some EU member states have observed malicious cyber activities collectively designated as Costriter and associated this with the Russian state. Such activities are unacceptable as they seek to threaten our integrity and security, democratic values and principles, and the core functioning of our democracies. These malicious cyber activities are targeting numerous members of parliaments, that's we, my friends, government officials, politicians, and members of the press and civil society in the European Union by accessing computer systems and personal accounts and stealing data. The European Union and its member states strongly denounce these malicious cyber activities, which all involved must put to an end immediately. We urge the Russian Federation to adhere to the norms of responsible state behavior in cyberspace. That's what we see today, that first in the history of humankind, we have the first state cyber terrorist. It's Russian Federation, unfortunately, one of member states of our organization. And it means that we need to react. Because in other way, there will be other people, because they're trying to hack and attack democratic systems. They try to attack elections, referendum, so they can say who will be president or prime minister or parliamentarians of any European country from Moscow. That's something absolutely unacceptable. And the second thing, besides the cyber attacks, is the using of cyberspace. What do I mean? We see, for example, Russia Today, propaganda activity. That's a Russian state channel which is active all over the world, and Russia is spending hundreds of millions of euro for this Russia Today channel, which is completely propagandistic and not anything else. And they're killing people not by gun, but by their propaganda. And I want to thank German authorities who recently blocked two YouTube German-speaking channels of Russia Today. Previously, it was made by state of Latvia, and we need to encourage such activity, and we need to do it in all our countries to stop using of cyberspace for absolutely malicious propaganda. And we can do it, and we need to do it here, because unfortunately, still even in Strasbourg, you can find Russia Today. That is unacceptable. We need to react. Thank you very much.
Merci, Monsieur Goncharenko. Et je passe maintenant la parole à Monsieur Özsoy Izyar de la Turquie, qui se prononcera au nom du groupe G8E. Pardon.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. It's clear that the rapporteur has put a great deal of work into this very detailed report. The topic is a very important one, as cybercrime has become a major threat that has visited many countries in recent times. We are told that the purpose of the second additional protocol to the Convention on Cybercrime is to provide sharper tools to investigate cybercrime and obtain justice for victims. This is all good and perhaps necessary, but of course we must carefully examine the impact of this protocol on human rights safeguards in this area. The rapporteur believes that the protocol strikes a reasonable balance but does nonetheless suggest some further safeguards to protect human rights. I think the amendments proposed do have value and they do stitch in further protections, but are they enough? I am not so sure that they are. I believe the Assembly should give strong consideration to the fears expressed not just by the Electronic Frontier Foundation, but a whole host of other civil society organizations, such as the European Digital Rights Network, the TEDIC, and the Charisma Foundations, just to name a few. And I want to quote directly from a paper written by the civil society organizations. Quote, governments are on the cusp of adopting a set of international rules which will reshape how cross-border police investigations are conducted. They go on to say that, and I quote, many elements of the protocol are a law enforcement wish list, end quote. In particular, they criticize that in Article 14, data protection safeguards do not require all processing of personal data to be adequate, fair, and proportionate. They go on to say that those three words, adequate, fair, and proportionate, are important distinctive conditions for accessing personal data recognized in several modern data protection legislations across the world. Each term imposes different requirements when applied to the collection, use, and disclosure of personal information. The absence of these words together indicates that fewer, weaker, and outdated conditions to access data will be allowed and tolerated. Overall, the rapporteur takes on board 8 of the suggestions made by civil society organizations, but rejects 24 of them, which is 75%. The stakes are very high here, and I remain doubtful that correct balance has been struck. In particular, the protocol fails to ensure there are data protection standards worldwide. Parties to the additional protocol should be required to accede to and properly implement Convention 108+ of the Council of Europe in order to ensure that safeguards provided for under domestic law regulate the law enforcement powers and that tools given by the protocol match international standards of data protection. A line encouraging states to consider implementing Convention 108 is not just strong enough. Even the weak standards applied in Article 14 are effectively optional. Signatories are explicitly permitted to bypass the safeguards through various mechanisms, none of which provide any assurance that adequate privacy protections will be in place. So, with detailed law enforcement powers should come detailed legal safeguards, not a one-sided compromise on privacy and data protection. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Eusoy. Et finalement, c'est Monsieur Efstatio Konstantinos de la Chypre qui se prononcera au nom du groupe socialiste. Monsieur Efstatio, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Firstly, I would like to thank and congratulate Mr. Javarov for his extraordinary and thorough work and his report. Our remark is that the explosive growth of the internet and our accelerated dependence on digitalization has facilitated the dramatic surge of new and more sophisticated criminal cyber activity, often transcending borders across multiple jurisdictions. This growing systematic misuse and exploitation by cyber criminals highlights the need for more targeted common strategies aimed at practical collaboration against cybercrime. Cybercrime may take different forms, ranging but not limited from an illegal access to internet and its malicious misuse, and arriving to computer-related fraud and child pornography. We must never forget that the Budapest Convention is the only binding international instrument against cybercrime. One of its main functions is to provide a framework for international cooperation between state parties to the treaty. So it was imperative to build our response on it rather than neutralize it by a new methodology. There is no doubt that the additional protocol provides for a supplementary protection on cybercrime because during the last 20 years, cybercrime has taken new interstate and transfrontier characteristics and new forms, which render its detection and punishment very difficult. It is therefore welcomed because it provides the new tools on the disclosure of electronic evidence. It also gives access to direct cooperation, prompt collaboration, and clearly stipulates that human rights must be protected and taken into account when countering. Finally, it safeguards the protection of personal data. It is imperative that we pay specific attention to certain provisions pertaining to the protocol, so that we promote its proper practical impact and avoid any arbitrary intervention in human rights. No unlawful exploitation by the public authorities can be tolerated. We must ensure that the protocol is applicable no matter the different criminal justice systems and legal regulation frameworks. Therefore, we aim at forecasting the adoption of new data handling methods and evolving technology, guaranteeing proportionality and transparency in a balanced way. The protocol mandates clear mechanisms against the disclosure of personal data and clarifies that the investigations must not amount to any form of fishing expedition. We need to make certain that our common fight against the global challenge does not hinder upholding the rule of law and protecting the fundamental rights of the victims of the cybercrimes. Thank you very much.
Merci, Monsieur Eustatio. Et je passe maintenant donc à la liste des orateurs. Et la première inscrite, c'est Madame Dara Cagliari de l'Irlande, qui en principe devrait être en ligne. Non, on me signale qu'elle est absente, donc on passe au deuxième orateur. Et ça, c'est Madame Jasko Yalisaveta de l'Ukraine de l'EPP. Madame Jasko, vous avez la parole. Semble être également absente. Bon, alors on passe au troisième orateur. Ça, c'est Madame Yildiz Zeynep, la Turquie. Oui, Madame est présente. Vous avez la parole, Madame.
Dear President, dear colleagues, I would like to thank the rapporteur for preparing this high-quality report in such a short period. The Assembly's contribution to the second additional protocol to the Convention on Cybercrime on enhanced cooperation and disclosure of electronic evidence carries utmost importance, as the cybercrime's importance increases every day in our digitally connected world. There is an urgent need to address important challenges for the investigation of cybercrimes, such as finding electronic evidence usually located in foreign, multiple, or even unknown jurisdictions, and in the possession of private entities. This protocol will enable a more effective cooperation between authorities and private internet providers to ensure that electronic evidence is speedily and reliably processed. This criminal justice instrument will facilitate international cooperation in the fight against cybercrime while respecting the fundamental rights of the victims suffering from these crimes. Therefore, this protocol will be of benefit to the relevant authorities, internet providers, as well as victims. Based on this understanding, Turkey has actively participated in multilateral discussions concerning the protocol. The implications of this legal instrument concerning privacy of individuals should also be not neglected. Acquiring electronic evidence for criminal investigations by nature requires accessing personal data, which is protected by various international agreements. The measures foreseen by the protocol should be evaluated in conjunction with the necessary procedural safeguards to protect privacy. The future parties to this protocol should succeed in striking a delicate balance between personal privacy and fighting cybercrime. Cybercrime knows no borders, and fighting against it requires a robust international cooperation. This protocol is a step in the right direction for ensuring perpetrators of cybercrimes and are brought to justice. The absence of international cooperation should not let the cyber criminals inflict more suffering on their victims and evade justice. The protocol and Assembly's opinion will certainly facilitate Member States' efforts to address difficulties in fighting cyber crimes. On a separate note, I'm shocked by the statement of my Greek colleague who delivered a speech on behalf of the EPP group during the previous debate, comparing the case of Syrian refugees in Turkey with the situation of Belarus is a reflection of an obsessive attitude. I encourage him to address the issue of pushbacks instead. Thank you for your attention.
Merci Madame Yildiz et on passe à l'orateur suivant, ça c'est Monsieur Pablo Isban de l'Espagne, qui apparemment n'est pas dans la salle. On peut alors passer à l'orateur suivant, ça c'est Monsieur Koshin Vladimir de la Fédération de Russie.
Добрый вечер, господин председатель. Добрый вечер, коллеги. Хотел бы начать следующее. Протокол, который мы сегодня с вами обсуждаем, работа по нему началась в 2017 году. Сегодня у нас сентябрь 2021 года. Коллеги, это не просто медленно, это ужасно медленно. И несмотря на то, что 5 лет шла работа над протоколом, даже сегодня протокол, на наш взгляд, имеет ряд серьезных изъянов. Первое. Протокол игнорирует современные виды киберугроз. Так, например, в документе упомянуты только 9 составов преступлений в компьютерной сфере. А их сегодня, по данным ООН, более 30. При этом у нас с вами на пороге искусственный интеллект, квантовые технологии. Об этих вещах протокол даже не упоминает. Следующий недостаток, который мы считаем очень важным. Протокол закрепляет применение на практике статьи 32 Будапештской конвенции. Коллега из Франции упомянул, что Россия не подписала Будапештскую конвенцию. Хотел бы напомнить всем вам, почему мы это не сделали. Статья 32 документа конвенции предусматривает возможность для государства-участника получить трансграничный доступ к информации, источник которой находится в другом государстве, при условии получения согласия лиц, участвующих в обработке данных. При этом такой доступ к данным будет осуществляться без уведомления компетентных органов государства, в котором находится источник информации. Данный подход фактически подразумевает неограниченную свободу проникновения в информационное пространство других стран, нарушает принцип государственного суверенитета. И этот аспект по-прежнему не решается протоколом. Что же делать? Коллеги, хотел бы акцентировать ваше внимание на том, что в рамках ООН начал свою деятельность специальный комитет по разработке универсального договора по борьбе с киберпреступностью. В мае этого года в ходе заседания 75-й сессии Генассамблеи ООН консенсусом определены и закреплены правила работы спецкомитета. Принята резолюция Генассамблеи ООН номер 75/282 о противодействии использованию информационно-коммуникационных технологий в преступных целях. Документ позволяет начать открытый, инклюзивный процесс переговоров по консультативной работе над конвенцией, которая будет учитывать интересы всех без исключения стран и основываться на принципах суверенного равенства сторон, не вмешательства во внутренние дела. Мы также считаем, что некоторые положения Будапештской конвенции и обсуждаемого здесь протокола могли бы лечь в основу будущей универсальной конвенции, с тем, чтобы иметь больше возможностей для противодействия киберкриминалу и не создавать правовых коллизий с существующими инструментами. Спасибо за внимание.
Merci, Monsieur Kozin. Et on passe à l'orateur suivante. Ça, c'est Monsieur Umerov Rustem de l'Ukraine. Monsieur Umerov, qui n'est pas présent. On passe alors au 7e orateur inscrit. Ça, c'est Monsieur Gomez Reino Anton de l'Espagne, qui non plus n'est présent dans la salle. Alors, je passe la parole à Madame Rushka-Vinchinikova Irina de la Fédération de la Russie. Elle est en ligne. Oui, Madame, vous avez la parole.
Уважаемый господин председательствующий, уважаемые коллеги, я бы тоже хотела продолжить тему, начатую моим коллегой в предыдущем докладе, и озвучить несколько тезисов по докладу. Ну, во-первых, сфера, о которой идет речь, развивается чрезвычайно стремительно. Во-вторых, законодательное регулирование во всех странах существенно запаздывает. Запаздываем мы с принятием соответствующих документов. В-третьих, международные акты, по нашему мнению, должны быть универсальными и выноситься на обсуждение мировых площадок, в частности, Организации Объединенных Наций. И Российская Федерация последовательно выступает за реализацию именно этого тезиса. Далее, особое внимание, помимо того, что уже было сегодня освещено моим коллегой, следует обратить на развитие, стремительное развитие технологий с использованием искусственного интеллекта, которые на сегодняшний день еще в целом недооценены и могут быть использованы как во благо, так и в противоправных целях. Уважаемые коллеги, считаю, что мы должны идти не только по пути выработки процедур и требований в рамках борьбы с конкретными киберпреступлениями, но также параллельно развивать общественные институты, направленные на их профилактику. Здесь могут быть эффективны механизмы саморегулирования, такие, например, как добровольная сертификация, добровольное соблюдение рекомендательных документов, выработанных экспертным сообществом. Использование таких механизмов особенно актуально в сфере применения технологий искусственного интеллекта. В Европейском Союзе сейчас только вырабатываются подходы к нормативному регулированию этих вопросов. А эти вопросы отнесены к высокому риску. В частности, такие как биометрическая идентификация личности, профилизация, формирование доказательственной базы при разбирательстве в судах. На межгосударственном уровне было бы правильно разработать общие этические нормы, которые могли бы быть восприняты в качестве рекомендаций для развития национальных законодательств. Так, например, в настоящее время в Российской Федерации проходит стадию экспертных обсуждений проект Национального кодекса этики в сфере искусственного интеллекта. Этот документ устанавливает общие принципы и стандарты поведения. Этим принципом могут и должны руководствоваться лица, принимающие различное участие в функционировании систем искусственного интеллекта на территории Российской Федерации. Сам кодекс является рекомендательным документом, и нарушение его положений не повлечет за собой юридической ответственности, но станет действенным механизмом общественного воздействия на недобросовестных акторов искусственного интеллекта. Распространение этого опыта на международном уровне позволит активнее привлекать к участию в решении проблем в сфере кибербезопасности крупные транснациональные корпорации, а также в целом будет способствовать повышению эффективности систем противодействия киберугрозам. Спасибо.
Merci, Madame Ruka-Vishnikova. Alors, le dernier orateur inscrit, c'est Madame O'Loughlin Fiona de l'Irlande, qui semble être également absente. Bon. Oui, est-ce que M. Vardanian de l'Arménie est présent dans la salle? Parce qu'il a également demandé encore la parole. Non. Bien, alors la liste des oratrices et des orateurs est épuisée. Néanmoins, nous avons encore le temps de donner la parole à des orateurs supplémentaires dans l'hémicycle ou à distance qui n'auraient pas été inscrits. Si un membre de l'Assemblée souhaite prendre la parole, il peut se manifester maintenant. Ici dans la salle, il n'y a plus d'intérêt, non? En ligne? Personne? Non? Bon, alors la liste des orateurs est définitivement close. Et le rapporteur, il a dû nous quitter, mais il nous a laissé le message que M. Boris Silevix se déclare d'accord pour répondre aux orateurs. M. Silevix, vous avez donc 3 minutes pour répondre.
Thank you, President. I hope I can merge this time with my brief intervention as a chairman of the reporting committee. Yes, first I would like to express my gratitude to all those who took part in this debate. And indeed, Ms. Egetalan makes some very important points, and Mr. Ocho and Mr. Eustatio. Of course, it's a very specific issue, and apparently it's not a proper format to discuss technicalities, but this is certainly correct. And our Russian colleagues also expressed some criticism. Yes, it took quite a long time, but that's inevitable. We need international cooperation to fight cybercrime, because cybercrime is transnational by definition, by default. At national level, it is simply impossible. And while recognizing this criticism, I still believe that the position of our Russian friends is somewhat controversial. They recognize that these 5 years were not enough to persuade Russia to join this instrument. So maybe we need 10 more years to persuade Russia. But probably the problems are somewhere else. And the new initiative mentioned by Mr. Kozin, in fact, this is a sort of counter project. This is a sort of alternative to the Convention on Cybercrime adopted 20 years ago. But if you really wish to make it open for everybody, really universal, acceptable for ratification by many states, you will have to do the same. You will have to go through many lengthy negotiations, and okay, maybe you are able to do this within several months, but sorry, I don't believe this. The problem is somewhere else, in my view, that indeed we have to find a very fragile balance between effective fight against cybercrime on the one hand and reliable protection of human rights and, first of all, protection of personal data on the other. And it's really not that easy to find a golden mean. Is it possible to speed up the process? Probably yes, if we completely disregard and ignore human rights. But I am afraid that if the initiators of this idea of alternative convention choose this way, it will be difficult to expect that democratic states will join this instrument. As to universal regional nature of the convention, I happened to be a member of this assembly 20 years ago when this convention and its first protocol were discussed, and it is universal in nature. Many states which are not member states of the Council of Europe have acceded to this convention, and I believe that we should continue working with this convention, try to improve it, to streamline, to take into account all new developments, rather than to throw it away and to start something new. And in the end, I would like to praise efforts by Mr. Jafarov. This is his first report in the Assembly. He worked very diligently and within very short time, and I believe that the report is good, and I call upon all members to support it. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Silevix. La discussion générale est donc close. La Commission des migrations, des réfugiés et des personnes déplacées a présenté un projet d'avis pour lequel aucun amendement n'a été déposé. Nous allons alors procéder au vote sur le projet d'avis contenu dans le document 15 379. Ok, on me signale qu'il s'agit donc bien de la Commission des questions juridiques. Voilà. Et le scrutin, donc encore une fois, je rappelle qu'une majorité des 2/3 est requise. Le scrutin est ouvert dans l'hémicycle et à distance. Le scrutin est clos et je demande donc l'affichage du résultat. Voilà le résultat, donc 22 votes en faveur, une voix contre et 13 abstentions. Et si j'ai bien donc calculé, il s'agit donc de la majorité des tiers qui a été donc atteint. Merci et félicitations alors. Nous en venons maintenant au rapport d'activité du Bureau et de la Commission permanente. Au cours de sa réunion du jour, le Bureau a décidé de proposer à la ratification de l'Assemblée la saisine des commissions. Un document récapitulant ces saisines a été mis en distribution. Il s'agit du document 15 375, addendum numéro 3. Ces saisines doivent être soumises à la ratification de l'Assemblée au terme de l'article 26.3 du règlement. Il n'y a pas d'objection? Non, ce n'est pas le cas. Donc ces saisines sont donc ratifiées. Nous devons maintenant nous prononcer donc sur les autres décisions du Bureau figurant dans ce rapport d'activité. Document 13 375, addendum numéro 3. Y a-t-il d'objection à l'adoption de ces décisions? Non, il n'y a pas d'objection. Les autres décisions du Bureau sont donc approuvées. Mes chers collègues, nous sommes arrivés au terme de nos travaux. Je remercie ceux d'entre vous qui sont encore ici, ainsi que tous les rapporteurs des commissions qui ont accompli un travail considérable. Je tiens également à remercier tous les vice-présidents qui ont contribué au bon déroulement de nos séances. Il s'agit de Mme Laima Lucia Andrikiene, de M. John Howell, de M. Kimmo Kiljunen, de M. Alexander Mereksko, de Mme Ria Omen-Wichten, de Mme Nicole Triss et de M. Ahmed Yildiz. Mes remerciements vont aussi à l'ensemble du personnel et aux interprètes qui rendent fidèlement compte de nos travaux. Enfin, je remercie les équipes de techniciens qui ont permis la tenue de cette session hybride. J'informe l'Assemblée que la première partie de la session ordinaire de 2022 devrait se tenir du 24 au 28 janvier 2022. Je déclare donc close la quatrième partie de la session ordinaire de l'Assemblée parlementaire du Conseil d'Europe pour l'année 2021. La session est levée.